I don't know about you, but when someone says compact hatchback to me, my mind immediately thinks Volkswagen Golf. For 2018, the Golf got a minor refresh, and then for 2019, we got an all-new engine under the hood, shared with the new Volkswagen Jetta. Obviously, that means it's time for one of our in-depth dives into the Golf, and in this video, we're talking about the base engine model. So if you want to know about the Golf R or the Golf GTI, those engines haven't changed, so refer to our existing videos on those models. Clean lines and restrained styling has long been a Volkswagen hallmark, and that's certainly true for the Golf. So nothing going on up front is nearly as controversial as what we see in some of the competition in this segment. A little bit controversial, however, are these halogen headlamps. I had hoped that Volkswagen would upgrade these to newer LED units like we do find in a lot of the compact hatchback competition. We do have LED daytime running lamps down here lower in the module, but the turn signals, the headlamps, etc., they're all incandescent. At 167.6 inches long, the Golf is very clearly longer than previous generations of the Golf ever have been, but Volkswagen has really kept overall growth in check, especially when you compare this to something like a Honda Civic hatchback. This is almost a foot shorter than that Honda hatchback model, even though we have a wheelbase that is pretty close to the Honda overall. Now, some might argue that the Honda isn't really a hatchback, it's more of a liftback in the Honda hatch because it does have a very aggressive angle, and overall, again, it is pretty long. But as you'll see down there at the bottom of your screen, this is definitely shorter than some of the other hatchbacks with which this competes. Volkswagen fights back with typical Germanic practicality, giving the Golf a very square profile overall that really improves overall cargo practicality and definitely rear seat headroom versus some of the swoopier competition. As with the front, restrained styling definitely is the name of the game back here. You'll see that we have all red rear lamp modules. I know on the camera it looks like that turn signal is an amber element. In the US, it is not. It is red. It's just a trick that the camera plays on our overall balance there. We have LED backup lights right over here on the side, and then the hatch release is integrated right there into the Volkswagen logo. Down here at the bottom of the bumper, we see something pretty typical for Volkswagen and Audi these days, which are faux exhaust tips. These are not real. Real exhaust tips are tucked up under the bumper. Worldwide, there are a ton of different engines available in the Volkswagen Golf, from base diesel engines in other markets to the fire-breathing Golf R. In the United States, however, things start out with this one right here. It's a 1.4-liter four-cylinder turbocharged direct injection engine that's been borrowed out of the brand new Jetta. This produces 147 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque. The Golf starts out with a 6-speed manual transmission, or you can get the same optional 8-speed auto that we find in the Jetta, so no CVTs under here. This engine is an all-new design for Volkswagen, and it was definitely designed to target fuel economy. EPA numbers come in at 32 miles per gallon combined for both the manual transmission, which is what we have here, or the model with the 8-speed automatic transmission. However, you should know that in real-world driving, the 8-speed auto is definitely going to be more fuel efficient than what we're driving right here, about 3 to 4 mpg overall. One reason that you might want to look at a Golf over some of the Asian competition is that the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat, even though we are taking a look at an SE trim with the manual seats. So it still has the adjustable lumbar support, the height adjustment, and the power recline. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion that should make it a lot easier for shorter or taller drivers to find a good driving position. And lastly, thanks to the very square profile in the Golf, we have a pretty decent amount of headroom, even though this does have the moonroof. The back seats in the Golf are roomier than you might suspect. We do have less legroom back here than in the Civic or in the Niro, but we have a little bit more than we find in the Ford Focus and the Corolla. The biggest advantage to the Golf is, again, the very square profile. That allows me in this driver's seat to sit in a more upright position than I would be able to in some of the competition, and that's going to give me all the legroom you see right here, about 3 to 4 inches or so. We also have a decent amount of headroom. That's really obvious if I move over to the middle seat, where I still have about 3/4 of an inch of headroom left. This is definitely going to be roomier in the back seat than the average subcompact or compact sedan. If I move all the way over to the right side, you'll really notice the fact, however, that the combined legroom numbers are below some of those larger entries. So with this front seat all the way back in its tracks, adjusted for a 6'5" passenger I had up there, my knees are definitely touching the seat back. Behind the hatch, we find just over 17 cubic feet of storage space, putting this right in line with the all-new Toyota Corolla Hatchback, but definitely below something like a Honda Civic, which has over 25 cubic feet of storage space. That is going to make a pretty big difference when it comes to putting larger items in your vehicle. On the other hand, this cargo area is definitely more square than what we find in the Honda Civic. Again, the Civic has more of a lift-back profile, and that means that the hatch in the back is not as vertical, so some of those larger and squarer items might fit better in here with the rear seats folded than in the Civic with its rear seats folded. Hopping onto the inside, one thing that I immediately noticed is that the sunshade for the moonroof is not completely opaque, so it does let a decent amount of light through. That's definitely not my preference, as I've said before. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. The seats are upholstered in Volkswagen's imitation leather product. They are perforated to help improve breathability, but overall they don't breathe quite as well as Volkswagen's leather upholstery. The interior design is definitely as restrained as the exterior. We have soft touch upper sections on the doors, soft touch sections right there around the armrest, but the bulk of the door is made from hard plastics. We have a carpet insert right there in the bottle holder area. That is a really nice touch because it helps keep things from jangling around down there like we find in cars that just use harder plastics. The Germanic theme continues as we move on over to the dashboard. We find a reasonably sized bin-style glove compartment. I had no problem fitting larger tablet computers in there. Some trim that looks like brushed metal but is actually plastic. And then as we move on to the center console, we find Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. In addition to the CarPlay integration, we find basically the same software that we see in most of the more modern Volkswagens in America. There's some touch direct access buttons on each side for radio, media, the phone interface if you have a phone paired with it that way, and then the app button will take you right back to the CarPlay interface. Below the touchscreen, we find the controls for the heated seats and the single zone manual climate control. There's a storage area right there where we have a USB port, but not quite enough room to stick some of those larger smartphones. As I said, we're driving the model with the 6-speed manual transmission. Reverse is over to the left and up. You push down on the shifter for that. That's not my preference. Personally, I prefer reverse to be over to the right and down. We have the engine start-stop button right there. Between the front seats, we find two decently sized cup holders, some little holders for coins or your parking ticket, handbrake, and then a center armrest that is padded and opens to reveal a fairly small storage compartment. As we see in some of Volkswagen's other cars, this ratchets up so that you can raise the armrest to your height, and then it slides forward and backward. The instrument cluster is pretty typical Volkswagen. We have crisp white numbers on black faces, and then a monochromatic multifunction display in the middle. That display gives us the status of our vehicle assist systems, a compass, audio system readouts, phone, vehicle status. We also have our typical trip computer readouts there. You can see that we've been averaging fairly good fuel economy for our manual transmission models, some additional gauges, and then a digital speedometer as well. The steering wheel is a 3-spoke design with a small flat bottom and a split bottom spoke right there. On the left side of the wheel, we find the buttons for the cruise control, a button for the active safety system features. We can click that button and then use these control buttons to adjust the safety system options. And then on either side of the steering wheel, we find controls for the infotainment system. Track forward and backward on the right, volume up and down over here on the left. Moving back to the right, these buttons control that multifunction LCD between the speedometer and tachometer. We have a view button, an OK button that allows us to select options right there, and then page change and then option select buttons. As with most modern cars that have a manual or an automatic option, the automatic is going to be the faster choice when it comes to acceleration. And it's obvious when you start driving this harder out on your favorite winding mountain road that the bones of this vehicle really were designed for the GTI and the Golf R as well. If you get the manual transmission here, then your speed 0 to 60 depends on how fast you are on the pedals and the shifter. We were able to go 0 to 60 in 7.8 to 7.9 seconds depending on the run that we were clocking. It's pretty easy to tell exactly what your limits are, and it's easy to have a great deal of fun in a relatively inexpensive vehicle. Speaking of fun, I definitely enjoy the combination of this 1.4-liter turbo engine and the manual transmission. They're very well mated to one another. It is worth noting, however, that this 1.4-liter turbo seems to have a little bit more turbo lag than we find in Honda's 1.5-liter turbo. Remember that the power tune on this engine is definitely below what we see in the Honda Civic, even for the base 1.5-liter turbo. When it comes to overall stopping distances, this and the Jetta are pretty close. 123 feet in this model, basically the same as the Jetta, and pretty average for the compact hatchback segment. Handling ability is something that Volkswagen has long been known for, and that's certainly the case in this generation of the Golf. It has a neat and tidy feeling to it. We don't have quite as much steering feedback from the front tires as we see in a Mazda 3, but overall this is pretty good for the segment. When you get out on a rougher gravel road like we're on here, it's obvious that the Golf has a well-balanced suspension tune. This is not ultra soft, but I think it is a good balance between decent ride quality out on rougher roads or out on freeway expansion joints, while at the same time preserving those handling characteristics that you expect in a German vehicle. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, we measured 72 decibels in here, which puts this a little bit louder than something like the Hyundai Ioniq, so I'm going to go ahead and give this an A-. Fuel economy is one of the big reasons that we find this 1.4-liter turbo engine under the hood. We've been averaging just under 32 miles per gallon, 31.5 or so over a week of mixed driving. That is definitely below the score that we got in the Jetta with the automatic transmission. And in a pretty brief drive of a dealer-provided automatic version of the Golf, we scored similar numbers to that Jetta. Some of that, of course, may have to do with the way that we've been driving this vehicle, but generally speaking, most folks will get better fuel economy with that 8-speed automatic. It's also worth noting that in city driving, the 8-speed automatic also gets a start-stop system, so that's going to help improve your overall fuel economy if you live in a climate where turning off the engine isn't going to affect the air conditioning performance. While we're talking about transmissions, one important thing to keep in mind is that we don't have too much torque below about 1700 RPM or so. So now that the engine has climbed up to about 2000 RPM, we're getting a little bit of acceleration in those higher gears, but you're definitely going to be shifting this an awful lot more than something like a Honda Civic Sport. That is one of the reasons that you might want to get the 8-speed automatic transmission, because it's going to be doing all of that shifting for you. It's going to be a little bit less tiring in some hill climbing situations. But I really love the way this 6-speed manual shifts. I'm a little bit torn as to whether I like this one or the one in the Honda Civic better. Again, I do like the shift pattern in the Honda Civic, but they both have an excellent feel. I do love the way the clutch pedal feels in here, however. This definitely has a more solid, more engaging feel to it than we find in the Hyundai Elantra. For 2019, the Golf comes in a few different trims. We have the Golf S and SE, which is what we've been driving this week and what we're talking about right now. We also have the GTI and, of course, the Golf R. The regular Golf is considerably less expensive than the performance version, starting at $21,845. If you want the base GTI, which is the next level up in performance, that's at least $27,595. And the R trim, which is all-wheel drive, will start at $40,395 and then go up from there as long as you start adding options. Unlike some of the competition, the manual transmission is standard on both S and SE, as is the 1.4-liter turbo. So when you're comparing base versions of the Golf to perhaps base versions of the Honda Civic, remember that in the Civic sedan, for instance, the turbocharged engine is not standard. The manual transmission is standard on both S and SE trims, as is the 1.4-liter turbocharged engine. That is a little bit different than some of the competition. Many of the competitors in this segment start with automatic transmissions, especially in the higher-end trims. So even if you get a manual transmission base in something like a Toyota Corolla, you'll notice that as you work your way up the trim ladder, the automatic becomes standard. And that's not the case in the Golf. The other thing that we have is that 1.4-liter turbo engine standard, although power is definitely lower than the 1.5 or 1.6-liter turbos we see in the competition at just 147 horsepower. Adaptive cruise control is not standard, but it can be added for $1,300. The Golf is an interesting option in America because it's small. It's just 2 inches longer than a Kia Soul and 10 inches shorter than a Honda Civic hatchback. But the sedan relation to the Golf, the Volkswagen Jetta, is one of the longest entries in its segment, so it is considerably longer, for instance, than something like the new Toyota Corolla. The Golf has always been about cargo practicality, and that's why we see the relatively square format even in this generation of Golf. So overall room on the inside is pretty decent, even though the exterior size is a little bit compact. But it's not quite as efficient in terms of overall packaging as something like that Kia Soul, even though the Soul is in the next category down. Overall interior room is more generous than what we see in the new Corolla hatchback, but the cargo area at 17.4 cubic feet is a little bit smaller than the Kia Soul, and only a little bit bigger than the Honda Fit, definitely below what we see in the Honda Civic hatchback. But the interior, in terms of overall fit and finish, design, and parts quality, is definitely above the Honda Fit, the Nissan Versa Note, and even the new Kia Soul, especially when we're talking about the less expensive versions of the Kia Soul. So that's what makes the Golf a little bit tricky to talk about, because overall size-wise it's almost a subcompact vehicle in America, but the rest of the vehicle definitely feels like it's in keeping with the next segment up. And that's why our first competitor here is going to be the Honda Civic hatchback rather than some of those subcompact entries in America. The Civic hatch starts at $21,450, definitely in the same price range as the base version of the Golf. Personally, I like the overall styling of the Golf more than the Honda Civic. The Honda Civic is definitely adventurous when it comes to styling, but I prefer the more restrained theme that we see in the Volkswagen. Now, the Civic is roomier, and its turbocharged engine is definitely more powerful. The CVT is also going to give you better acceleration than the 8-speed automatic that we see in the Golf available, even though the CVT is not going to be quite as engaging to drive as the 8-speed automatic. Personally, I think the sport trim in the Honda Civic hatchback line is the optimum in value at $22,250. You can still get some of those performance upgrades that you see available for the Honda Civic Si that will bump the power in that particular model up to or beyond Civic Si type power, so it's definitely going to be a good performance option in this segment. It's going to be significantly less than a Volkswagen GTI. It's not going to be quite as special, but it is really going to give you quite similar performance. The touring model of the Honda Civic does get more expensive and significantly more expensive than the Golf without giving you the same performance that we see in the Volkswagen GTI, so it is kind of an unusual cross there. But where the Civic really excels is the size of the interior. We have a lot of legroom going on, we have that big cargo area in the back as well. Next up, we have the relatively recent Toyota Corolla Hatchback. This is Toyota's attempt to bring a little bit more personality into their lineup, and we definitely see that with the hatchback model. Oddly enough, they introduced the Corolla Hatchback before they introduced the Corolla Sedan in America, which was a little bit surprising. Although the Corolla has more personality than Toyota has ever put into a Corolla before, I think that the Golf still has a little bit more personality. The Golf also feels a little bit peppier thanks to its turbocharger. On the other hand, Toyota has been very aggressive with pricing in the Corolla hatchback, and they've really kept overall pricing pretty low. In fact, the Corolla hatchback does not top out nearly as high as just about every other entry in this particular segment. And they're also putting all of their latest active safety technologies in the Corolla hatchback as well. For instance, their adaptive cruise control system is standard, and it works very well with the manual transmission as well. This is one of the few adaptive cruise control systems out there that will remain on when you engage the clutch. So if you're going up a hill and you need to downshift, you just put the clutch in, shift it into fourth gear, put the clutch back out, and then the adaptive cruise control will take back off again. So you don't have to keep re-engaging it as you're going up a hill or as you're accelerating or decelerating. You can row the gears along, the adaptive cruise control will control the throttle. It's a pretty decent system overall. In addition to that, handling has significantly improved in the Corolla hatchback, and the hatchback version of the Corolla really does have the chops to compete with the Volkswagen Golf in the S and SE trims when it comes to overall handling. Next up, we have the all-new Mazda 3 hatchback. The front end is very, very exciting visually, and the back end is a little bit polarizing. Let me know what you think about it down there in the comment section below. I think that the Mazda 3 sedan is without question the most attractive sedan in this category, but the hatchback isn't quite to my liking in terms of the overall rear end styling. The Mazda 3 is going to be a little bit more expensive than most of the entries because Mazda is trying to go in a more premium direction with their latest models. So it starts at $23,600, notably above some of the competitors here, and we don't find all the same kind of active safety systems in that base model that we do see in some of the competition. Instead, we find a very trendy and stylish interior and an interior that has parts quality that's definitely above average for this segment. We also get a little bit more horsepower out of the engine, 186. Unfortunately, that engine is still mated to an older 6-speed automatic transmission, and that really hampers overall 0 to 60 performance. If we're talking about the manual transmission model versus manual transmission model, then overall performance is going to be relatively similar between the Mazda 3 and some of the other options in this segment that have around 180 horsepower. But if we're talking automatic or CVT versus the Mazda 3 is going to fall a little bit behind. It's also worth noting that if you want the manual transmission in the Mazda 3 hatch, there is only one trim you can get it in, and that's the top-end trim for $27,500. And you can only get it with front-wheel drive. The all-wheel drive option in the Mazda 3 at this moment is not compatible with the manual transmission. If you get carried away with options, that Mazda 3 hatchback will take you all the way on up to $30,000, which is about the same price as a lightly equipped Volkswagen GTI. So when it comes to overall value, the Volkswagen Golf is quite simply a better value overall than the Mazda 3 hatchback. I don't think the Volkswagen Golf is quite as attractive as the Mazda 3. It's definitely not as polarizing as the Mazda 3 hatch, but in light of the overall pricing here, you can see that the Volkswagen Golf is definitely a pretty good deal. Now, how about the Volkswagen Golf versus one of the other really good deals in this sort of segment, something like a Kia Soul Turbo? For $27,490, you could get the Soul with the turbocharged engine. That's overall a pretty good deal, but it's not quite the same thing as a Volkswagen Golf. Again, the Golf is a little bit wider. The Golf also has a slightly more premium interior than what we see in the Kia Soul, even though the Soul is brand new and the Golf is getting a little bit older. You'll also give up a little bit of overall handling ability to get the Soul Turbo and the better performance that we find in that model. Admittedly, 200 horsepower is going to be more fun, however, than what we see in the Volkswagen Golf. The result is that overall the Golf is a compelling compact hatchback in America without too much direct competition. Really, the most direct competition in my mind at the moment is the Toyota Corolla Hatchback, which is priced relatively similarly and has a relatively narrow window in terms of overall pricing that really is in line with the Golf S and the Golf SE. So if you're shopping for a Golf S or SE, definitely put the Toyota Corolla Hatchback on your shopping list, but I would also say take a look at the Honda Civic. Even though it is considerably larger, I think that a lot of folks out there may be interested in its blend of performance and value. Just keep in mind that being nearly a foot longer, it is going to be a little bit harder to park in the city. With all that out of the way, let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And if you were shopping right around $25,000 to $27,000 in this segment, which option would you pick if your own money were on the line? Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNauto so you can see what we're driving this week. And if you want to support this channel, click up there to the top of your screen, be taken on over to patreon.com, or you can become a channel member by just clicking that join button right there on your screen. I'll see you later.